Townes. Well, I met Townes because my first label was Poppy Records, and I went to Poppy because they were recording Townes, and I thought if they liked Townes, they might like me. And they did. So we were sort of label mates, and we wound up doing a few shows together. one time, we did a week together at this club in Coral Gables, Florida. And that was a raucous time, let me tell you. And we were staying at this hotel for the whole week, 5 nights, I think we were playing at this place. And we'd come back there one night with a couple of girls from the club, you know, and there was nobody in that motel, really. I mean, we were almost the only occupants, so we went swimming at about 2 o'clock in the morning, everybody naked as a jaybird, you know, jumping in and out of the pool. and Townes gets up there was a slide at the shallow end of the pool, and he gets up on the top of that slide. He goes, "I'm gonna ski down." On standing up on his feet, and he made it all the way to the bottom, and then his feet went out from under him, and he cracked his head on the edge of the slide, you know, as it went in, and he hit the water like a chunk of hamburger. I mean, it was like, I never swam so fast in my life. I was clear down at the other end of the pool. I got in there, dragged him out, and pumped him out. and he sort of came to, you know. Sitting there looking at me, "Chris," he says, "you saved my life." I thought, well, maybe, you know. And that was before I found out that there were innumerable people that had saved Townes' life. But he never forgot it. He would always introduce me to people. If I ran into him at a festival, he'd say, "Hey, this is Chris Smither. He saved my life." But he's a lovely guy. He's a lovely guy. He put himself through some hard times, and in the end, died way too soon.
I don't know how to put this. It was, you know, at that time, that was during the great credibility scare. You know, when Steve Earle was at the top of the charts, Lyle Lovett was having hits, you know, up in the top 5 of country music, Nancy Griffith, the O'Kanes, people like that. And I was working with the Sweethearts of the Rodeo. It was in 1987 when I came to town. I used to hang out at the Bluebird. Back in those days, the Bluebird would bring in national acts all the time. And so you'd see all kinds of music there. But the reason I'm telling you this is because Amy would always close the place, and then she'd let certain people stay in and drink. And it was always Fred Knobloch, Mark Germino, Steve Earle, Townes Van Zandt, and John Prine. And she'd let me hang out with those guys. So I'd be sitting on the edge of the bar, you know, and I wouldn't say a word. I would just, you know, sipping my whiskey or whatever, and these guys would be smoking cigarettes and talking, you know? And me, they didn't know me from Adam, you know? They came to sort of, you know, and John and I sort of, he remembered me every time he saw me, you know, "Hey, Kenny, how you doing?" And Mark Germino would, you know, remember me. I played on his last album that he made a couple of years ago. It's really good. But that was how I got to know John, was at late night, after hours at the Bluebird. And Townes, I never saw him drunk. Even though he was drinking, I never saw him drunk. He was just this quiet, nice, pleasant fellow. And then when I saw the movie about him, I was like, whoa, you know? I went to his house one time. There was this young girl that used to hang around the gigs I played, and she would always come to our gigs and stuff. And one night, she had to be she had to have a fake IRD or something. She couldn't have been older than 18 or 19 years old, you know. She was living out at Townes' place, and she asked me for a ride home. So I said, okay, I'll give you a ride home, you know. So I drove her over to Townes' place, and I had to use the restroom, and I went in his little place he was living in. It's like, whoa. You know, I was like, wow. Yeah. It wasn't pretty. I don't remember him ever being anything but kind, you know, and a smile on his face, and it seemed like he just was enjoying every moment of life, you know. At one time, he said to Marty Stewart, you know, Marty, I got this thing figured out. If I need a new refrigerator, I drive to Kansas City and play a show. And I was like, I heard him say that. I was like, that's great. You know, that's really good.
That's the life in a nutshell.
Yeah.
First met Townes in 1967 at the Second Fret in Philadelphia. It was a folk club. I was 16 years old and went down to see Woody's Truck Stop, which was a band that originally Todd Rundgren had been in, but it was a wonderful Philadelphia country rock band before there was country rock. Anyway, and Townes was opening, and I was one of them kids who hung out in the back rooms and weaseled my way wherever I could. Met Townes. He was a fresh-faced, you know, he was not strung out by then. And then over the years, you know, I played guitar for him at the Jerry Jeff birthday party one time, and I did cut If I Needed You on a tribute record to him. But yes, we were friends. The problem was, as much an abuser as I was one that always got up the next day, and as opposed to Blaze and Townes, I just couldn't get into the heroin and heavy alcoholism. You know, I'd have a drink and I'd do some blow maybe, but I was always a pothead and kind of got in the way of your pot high. But I was glad because, you know, they were really on you know, self-destructive paths that obviously that's what happened.
What did the people in the community at that moment think of Townes and his talents or whatever? Was it recognized?
Oh, yeah. He was revered. Blaze, unfortunately, no, because he was so so cantankerous, obviously, and at times, you know, I guess. But the songs were just brilliant, you know. But Townes was accepted because he was not violent and he was not big, you know, and he was not ornery. Oh, Blaze just looked at him. He was going, hey, "What did I do?" You know, Townes was sweet. Even, you know, he just wanted, you know, Guy Clark was a good friend. Guy, see, a lot of things. What a lot of people don't realize about that whole thing was, you know, writing songs. You know, if you're Harlan Howard, who was a great friend of mine, Harlan would get up, go to work at 9 o'clock and write from 9 till 1 or 2, and then go out drinking and get ideas. Because, you know, I remember his wife said, "Well, why don't you go hang out with the publishers and everything?" He says, "Listen, you know, I need a down and out waitress at the bar is going to tell me a better story than a fucking corporate lawyer," you know. And that was one of the things. But Townes, Guy, Blaze, especially Townes and Guy, and I knew this from personal, they needed stimulants, you know, and to sit there and write songs, the inspiration is so fickle that Go Fast Drugs and all this thing really help. Look at Roger Miller. I mean, you know, who was the original Pillhead, Johnny Cash, Roger Miller, etc. Those kind of things, thoughts come fast and furious, you know. And I still remember, you know, a guy saying one time, "I got to go get something, man. I need to write songs. I need to write songs. I need to go get something." And that's a dedication to the craft, you know. But it's a you know, it's a dead end street at some point, you know.
It's a hard way to live.
Yeah. And I tried, and then by the time I was 31, and I'd seen so many of my friends, you know, go down that path, I said, "All right, I'm done." You know, I had a kid, and a life and a band, and I said, you know, I mean, it was still ridiculous. I mean, you know, still back then, pot was just as bad. You know, I mean, you had to worry about getting busted, but health-wise, it was no problem. You know, the coke was bad, the speed was bad. You know. So, yeah.
There's a picture of Guy and Susanna on a porch with Townes, and Townes is
I
playing
know
fiddle.
the famous picture.
That was taken at Guy's house just right over here, and they tore it down. One of the many things torn down in Nashville about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think of their East Nashville roots.
I've been writing a song, I'll never finish it, called "This Ain't the Same Old Town. They're tearing all the buildings down and selling them by the pound. This ain't the same old town." I might just leave it at that because it's too sad. Same thing with Austin.
I think that's one thing that some of the people you talked about, there's an ambition that it takes just to survive all of that, that maybe a person like Townes might not be so ambitious for career-wise or whatever.
Exactly what it is that they were living for the song. You know, I was a performer. You know, I've always wanted to be on stage from the time I could remember. It was more important for me to be able to get on stage. That was my goal, to play every night, and we did it, you know.
I used to play cards at John's. John wouldn't even start playing cards till midnight or 1, and then play cards. You know, Guy Clark would be there, and Pat McLaughlin and Townes sometimes would be there. There was dealer's choice always. You know, dealer's choice got to call the game, and there was all kinds of silly games like, you know, high-low Chicago on Tuesday or some shit like that, where, you know, it's some rules that were almost impossible to keep up with. You know, deuces wild after you get a 2, after you get a 3, or some crazy thing like that. But there were some great card games, and really good ones. John would cook. He would cook chicken legs on his grill, and many times we'd be there hanging out, drinking and stuff, and John would start the grill, charcoal grill, and before he put any meat on it, the fire was already out. But forgot to do it, you know. And then he'd start over again. And sometimes it'd take him 2 or 3 times to get it done. But he had made the best chicken legs. He cooked chicken legs, and he made his own barbecue sauce out of K-Rose syrup and some other stuff. But it was just great, really good.
So who were the good poker players amongst that crowd?
Oh, John was good. McLaughlin's always good. The guy in Townes were good at playing cards. All them guys from Texas are good at playing cards. You know, they love to play cards. But, you know, and I don't want to mislead anybody like there was a card game over there every night or something. But there was a few card games where those guys were all there, and it was fun. You know.
Before I opened up the Old Quarter, I had known about Townes, and I saw him perform once at a place called The Jester. I was also opening act for a lot of people at the place called the Sand Mountain Coffee House. Very prestigious at the time. No alcohol. It was the old beatnik thing, and this lady, Mrs. Carrick, she was adamant, no alcohol. So, and we at the green room, Mrs. Carrick introduced me to Townes, and then she left, and Townes said, "Do you drink?" I said, "Yeah." He went to the window, and he had a gallon of wine on a rope because it was strict no alcohol. And so we took chugs, and that little one rebellious event just solidified us as friends for life. And then shortly, just a few months after that, I opened the Old Quarter. I found the Old Quarter. I found the building I was looking for, a cheap one, and so it was funny because if you played the Old Quarter, because I stole her waitresses, and you could hear the same music, but you could smoke weed on the roof and drink beer. I mean, she didn't have a chance really. And so anyway, no one could play at the Old Quarter, or they wouldn't play at Sand Mountain anymore. Well, Townes was the first big name to break ranks. He played the Old Quarter, and she never forgave me. When he break ranks, then the Old Quarter just really took off. Had Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt all of a sudden are my drunken buddies at the end of the bar. I didn't really know I was in songwriter royalty until I started, hanging out. He was always really fun. I mean, there was no person on earth more fun to get drunk with than Townes Van Zandt. I mean, he was upbeat. he really, he enjoyed his life when he was drunk. I can't get into the psyche of people and what it was like being Townes. If you have to be like that to be a genius, then I don't think I'm glad I'm not a genius, because he did suffer, but he was always so much fun. I mean, you won't hear many stories about Townes. You'll hear him doing crazy things, but not mean things. He wasn't a mean bone in his body. He liked to tease people, but he was so much fun. I mean, he was just fun to do everything with. Man, when we were on the road, just everything was an adventure with Townes. Well, do you remember in Austin, it was called Clarksville, and it was where blacks and hippies lived back in the 70s. It was shell roads, and he had a trailer, and I lived at the house across the street, and we were going through our BB gun phase. And Townes and I we would buy BBs by the gallon and shoot them every day. We had beer cans and stuff hung up everywhere. One day, we were shooting our BB gun. We just started this whole BB gun thing. We were shooting where we thought it was clear. And we're shooting like, half drunk, shooting BBs. And the guy comes out and shoots his shotgun there and says, "Stop pelting my house." We didn't know there was a house back there. Thank God. I mean, he didn't take time to ask us, but he was mad. I mean, man, we were so sorry, dude. We just had to move things over, We had no idea there was a trailer back there. No, we always stayed at motels. Occasionally, someone would have. I never liked to stay at people. I was like Townes. I love motels. Townes, motels. If he could build his dream house, it would be a motel. That's what he liked. Listen, I have this theory about Townes. I think he had defective taste buds because he didn't care about food, and he didn't even enjoy food. And listen, you can interview 100 people about Townes. You'll never hear any story about happened at the dinner table. Wasn't ever at the dinner table. Townes could have $5,000 in his pocket, go into a supermarket and come out with white bread and bologna. And you get mayonnaise, mayonnaise, that's the way he felt about food. So I think he had defective taste buds. Well, we were eating just fine. One thing about Townes, he made good money. I mean, back in those days, you could book Townes 365 nights a year. And so Townes, I don't know how much money he made from Poncho and Lefty, but he always had money because he could always gig the next day. And he didn't care about money, which was great if you worked for Townes. We didn't really work for Townes. I worked for Leytonstone. I played with Townes. I mean, whatever Townes made, it belonged to all of us. It was different with Leytonstone. 71, 2, and 3 is when I toured with him by myself. So I had a duel. I had a great bass playing gig with Townes and Leytonstone. I don't know if you remember back in those days, there was a lot of colleges that hired entertainment, especially acoustic. Well, people like Townes, who were good singer-songwriter type stuff, when that was real popular. So we played a lot of colleges. In fact, when I went on, he took me on the road a couple of times. We played all colleges, all the way up the East Coast, all through North Carolina, played Pratt Institute and New York City College. It was all really high-paying gigs. I mean, quality gigs. I mean, Townes took me on the road. He didn't need a bass player. He was a really adequate guitar player. He didn't need a bass player, but he and I got involved with heroin, and not proud of it, not ashamed of it. It just happened. And he would come get me and take me on the road to get me out of Houston. Bad news from Houston, half my friends are dying. I think I was one of those friends that were dying. And of course, so it's funny, he'd take me on the road, and then we'd get to New York and we'd buy heroin together. So I'm not sure if he and I just got along real well, and we were close friends. But when we played North Carolina, all these colleges there, they offered transportation, room and board. We stayed in a boarding house one time. Do you know the song "No Deal"? Well, we were staying at an all boys college, and they bussed in the girls from all girl college. And so at the end of the night, they were taking roll call, and one of the girls was missing. I knew where the girl was. It was in Townes' room. So they had an all-out search for this girl, and we almost got in trouble. And I managed to get to Townes early enough where he got her out of the room, but that's when he wrote the song. Almost got run out of town wearing nothing but my cowboy hat. That line came from, it was, I can't remember what I called it, Pembroke, I think, North Carolina.
Did the women like Townes?
Oh my God, are you kidding me? He was like the Elvis of folk singers. I mean, there would be 100 back in the day, you know, and it was a beautiful time. It was after birth control and before AIDS. It was a beautiful time. It was just a lot of free sex and beautiful women. I mean, I didn't have to worry. I knew there was going to be 99 women that he couldn't be with. So I always got laid more than I need to. And it was kind of a perk of playing with Townes. You had access to a lot of women who just drooled over Townes. Hey, he was cool. He was intelligent. Writing genius. He was fun as hell. It was a lot of fun. Townes was a lot of fun. I know he was hurting inside, but he rarely let that happen, come out. It was intellectual women and some not, but I mean, it was an intellectual crowd. These people were into listening to music, you know, into the words, and Townes was a genius. I mean, what can you say? He's the poet as good as any poet ever. I mean, who can say who's the best, but he's up there in the echelons of the greatest writers ever. Transportation at every college, although transportation at every college changed. And so we were playing Pembroke, North Carolina, which is an Indian reservation right by there. And our mode of transportation was a bicycle for two. We went from limousines to private drivers to a bicycle built for two. And of course, Townes made me ride on the front because it was freezing. And the liquor stores in North Carolina, they look like banks, you know. They don't have, you don't get to browse through the liquor. You have to go up to a teller and say, and you know, of course, we always knew what we wanted, really cheap vodka. But it was funny. I couldn't believe that the liquor stores all looked like banks. And Townes would make me ride up front, freezing. Not that it was, I'm sure it was cold in the back too. Townes spent quite a bit of time in New York, so Townes knew where to score in New York. I have a funny scoring story. We were one of our gigs, we were playing up there, and it was February. It was freezing. And, you know, Townes, you know, he always wore really nice. He liked the leather jackets with the fringe. I mean, nothing skimpy. The best you can buy. You know, boots, hats, Stetson hats. I mean, so we went down to this bar in the Bronx, and he put me in. He just stay right here, and I'm in this bar. I thought there was going to be a knife fight, but it was pretty sleazy. So anyway, it took a while, and I see Townes coming down the road. He's got no coat and no hat and no money, and he said, "Man, I talked him into letting me keep my boots." And so he got robbed for all our money in his coat and his hat. He did talk him into letting him keep his boots, thank God. I mean, in February in New York, you need boots. But, you know, back then, you had the option of getting cash. And we got paid in cash a lot. We ran around, we were loaded in dough. I mean, not loaded in dough, but just so much spending money that you didn't need any more spending money. One night, somewhere in North Carolina, we were at a motel, drunk. We became blood brothers that night. I still have my scar. We cut ourselves right here. So, because we had a gig the next night, and we held our hands together, counted to 10. I guess I can't remember what we did. But that night we ended up burning. We were burning money. And we said, we got to stop. We can't burn any money. We can't burn it. So he said, let's just go out and give the nicest person, first person that's nice to us, all our money. I said, let's do it. So we went to this coffee shop, you know, at 4 a.m. This nice lady, man, she was real sweet, brought us coffee. And we said, she's it. I said, she's it. So, you know, it looked like crackhead dealer money and all wadded up, you know. And I just went up and I laid it all on the counter and just walked out. And she was going, sir. Now, I'm sure she tells that story. These two idiots came in one night and put all this money on the bar. But so we gave her all the money. We got paid the next day again.
How much money was it?
I don't know. He was making $2,000 a week, and that's back when rent was $100 a month. You know, and it was. I don't know how much I gave her. I might have given her $1,000. Oh, I don't know. We don't really. I was drunk too. You know, I didn't count it. We were blood brothers, man. Townes was just so much fun to be with. He enjoyed himself. He enjoyed his life. I can't say what it was like when he was alone. I know when we were alone, we still managed to talk constantly. And I was on the road with him on one of his really heavy duty riding times when he was writing. He was writing Pancho and Lefty, and he wrote "To Live's to Fly" as part of that tour he was on. He wrote "To Live's to Fly." He wrote "No Deal" from the Weird Experience. Famous Rex's Blues. Huh? Well, it's funny. We were on tour again, and I don't know where we were. It was just Townes and I. And Townes said, "Rex, I have a brand new song. Why don't you step off the stage?" So I stepped off the stage, and he played Rex's Blues. And this became a tradition. I never played Rex's Blues with Townes. Even though I was in the band, he would always ask me to step off the stage. And so it just became, this was my chance to go back in the green room and take a slugs off the bottle. But, and it became a tradition. But and I hated that song. It was not very flattering. I mean, you know, we're in our 20s, you know, you don't want to write a song. I mean, I didn't like it. Now I appreciate it, and I do it. I have to do it. People almost make me do it. But I hated it for a long time. Listen to the words sometimes. It's not very flattering. You got to remember, I was in my 20s, and I was starting to go bald, and I was pissed off anyway. So I just didn't take it as flattering. I always appreciated the fact that he wrote a song about me, and I didn't die before he, you know, before he did. So I guess that's pretty cool. And now I appreciate it, and it's really true. The song is about, it could be Townes' blues, it could be Blaze's blues, it could be it could be Otis's blues. I mean, well, you don't drink, right?
No.
Did you ever drink?
No.
I need to interview you. But anyway, it could have been anybody's blues. We were living pretty loose. We were drinking and doing drugs, and it was the song captures what we were all doing, although it was foisted upon me to be the focus of how we were all living. So, you know, I like it now. I play it, and every time we do the Townes Wake at the Old Quarter in Galveston every year, and I have to do Rex's Blues. They won't let me go without doing it. We always played night gigs. I mean, I guess we did a couple of matinees, but Townes wasn't a matinee kind of guy. Later on, when the Hemorrhage Mountain Boys were touring with Townes, he'd gotten worse about gigs. He would get, what he would do is, we would wait. Mickey and I would wait, because he had 2 days out of each day. He had the early day where he'd get drunk, and then he'd pass out, and then it'd be a second day. So what we would do for the second day, we wouldn't wake him up until we were going on stage in 5 minutes. So he didn't have a chance to get drunk. And the first sets were always real good. Back then, even when he played drunk really well, but still it wasn't as good as, you know, he was so pristine, his guitar playing. When he was young and he was such a good performer. He could silence a 2,000-seat audience like that. I mean, one word, and keep them silenced. That's a talent, man. That's just remarkable. So when he started getting looser and not quite playing as pristine as we all know he could, it's a little bit irritating, but hey, it's Townes Van Zandt, you know. He's going to be that way. You couldn't stop him. He tried I remember he was sober on a few times, and he was just miserable when he was sober. Didn't talk much, just kind of to himself. That was his escape. Anyway, we were playing at this famous college, and Townes was on one of his benders. And thank God the police, we were in the motorhome, and our roadie, Johnny Guest, he left an ounce of weed on the dashboard. And so this cop was just kind of looking around, and he pointed his flashlight straight onto the ounce of weed. So we'd in between gigs, and our first and second set, we were in between. We were out in the Townes was inside, and then the cop said, "You can leave now, or you're going to jail. You leave town right now." So we had to go get Townes. He was drunk. He was in there with a tablecloth over his head, playing fiddle. And of course, the people who ran the place couldn't. They loved it. They didn't have to pay us, and we said, "We have to get out of town. Can we get paid?" And they said, "No." And so we got Townes out in the motorhome, and the cops followed us to the city limits. That's Townes'. That's where he was born, Fort Worth. But that's one of the train wrecks, and those were the train wreck gigs. What was sadder is like when he played the Old Quarter, and he played there twice. I opened up in. Well, he was the first. Well, Richard Dobson was actually the first person that ever played the Old Quarter. And Townes was the second week. And that's in 1996. And he was just couldn't, he was so weak at the time. Like I told you, he didn't weigh anything. He didn't eat properly. And he had to get X amount of drunk just to get on stage. And so his performances really sucked. And it hurt. But I still loved it. And people would come. Nobody, I know there's stories about people used to come to see Hank Williams. They don't care if he fell off the stage. They'll pay to see him. Well, Townes was the same way. He sold out the Old Quarter instantly, even though people knew he wasn't putting on his best performances. And they were really, if you've never seen Townes, you appreciate it. His songs carry themselves, but his performance really was bad.
Do you remember the last time you saw Townes?
Yeah, I do, man. I remember it. In fact, not that I knew this was going to be the last time, but I knew it was important. A couple of times he opened up to me and said, "Man, Rex, I have the blues and I can't shake it." And I knew that. I got to spend a week with Townes at my beach house the last time he played the Old Quarter, October the 5th. And, that whole week of the 5th, he was there. I don't know. It might have been the last club he ever played. I know he went to Europe right after that. But he was really unhealthy. I remember he was staying at my beach house, and he stumbled in the yard, and I grabbed him, and he was so light, and Townes was like 6'3", but he was light as a feather, and bless his heart, he just didn't weigh anything. And that shocked me how light he was. I knew how weak he was. Of course, you never expect anyone to die who's, you just don't expect it.
Were you able to go to his funeral?
Yeah, I went in fact, I don't have this year's Townes Wake t-shirt. There's a picture of me tuning Townes' guitar at the funeral, and somebody captured it and put it on the t-shirts for this year's Wake. It's me tuning. JT was going to play a song for the ceremony, and Townes' brother was a preacher. Did you know that? Yeah, Townes' brother was a preacher, and Townes wasn't necessarily religious. He was super spiritual, and look at his songs. He wrote some beautiful religious songs. They could be in hymnals, that 100-year-old hymnal. Some of these, two hands when he offers his hand. There's several songs that means he was very spiritual. Our first wakes, when it first took off, when I first had I was just so bummed out that the first year of his anniversary of death, I just said, we're going to have a wake. And we had, I didn't plan on anything special. Just, we're going to have a wake for Townes. And then it kind of turned out to be amazing. And then a few years after that, it was so full, people flying from all around the world and the country to celebrate him. It's amazing. Another thing that I think that's been really good for Townes is the internet. As many bad things as you can say about social media, it really got Townes out there, and he's got a lot of new people who discovered what a writer he is. So this last time, this one we just had, there was a lot of young people in there, man, doing Townes songs that I know never saw Townes live. And so there's people who worship Townes. I'm one of them. I love Townes. What can you say? People used to ask me, did you know you were playing with a legend? And I knew that with Lightning. with Townes, he was just my friend, and I was playing music with him. I knew how special it was, but no, I didn't think I was, part of this legendary thing that I was. So I wouldn't have acted any different. I was Townes' drinking buddy also. In fact, I think Townes always thought he was going to outlive me. It's just Rex's Blues is that song. In that song, Born to Grow and Grown to Die, I think Townes always thought he was going to outlive me. And he could have. Back in those days, we were reckless.
I worked when I was still at Bearsville. Eric von Schmidt made an album there, and I produced it. I was managing the studio, but I did this. I was the producer of the record, and it was for Kevin Eggers at Tomato Records. I think that was it. It was either Tomato or Poppy. I can't remember. They had different names for the same label. And at any rate, so we went to, Kevin Eggers had a house, a very nice townhouse in Brooklyn Heights, I think it was. And Eric and I went there to, I guess, bring him the album. And Townes was there. And he had just done the late, great Townes Van Zandt album. And for that label, same label. And so that's where I met him. But it wasn't much of a meeting. We were there to do this, and then I don't think I had heard any of his music at that point. I was amused by the late great reference because Hank Williams was my first love in music, and when I was a teenager, I was 14, 15 years, barely, almost 15 years old when Hank died. And by that time, I already had 2 albums of 78s. I had Mona and the Blues, I had Luke the Drifter, and right after he died, every time you heard his name, it was the late, great Hank Williams. And I know that Townes was making that connection. I was quite sure of that. And then, of course, later, I came to Nashville in, I guess it was November or so of 73. So one thing led to another, and I wound up staying there. Instead of in Austin, I stayed in Nashville. And one place I gravitated to was on West End Avenue called Bishop's Pub, around 32nd Street. And it was just a beer place with a pool table and nothing fancy at all. But inside there was these writers from Houston who had gravitated to Nashville. Townes was the head, sort of, and Guy and Susanna Clark, Richard Dobson, Rodney Crowell. And they would sit around and play for tips, singing songs, and play for tips and play pool, whatever, And that's how I really met Townes then. And then he had a place out in the country, and once the weather got good, go out there, play songs out there, But I was never. Townes inspired some people to really almost like worship him in a certain way, and it made me kind of. I'm not that person. I'm not that kind of person, and and of course I had heard Jack Clement produced that late great Townes Van Zandt album, and during this year, 73, 74, Jack was working on another album with Townes, and I went with Guy and Susanna over to Jack's tracks, and they were working, and I'm not into barging into recording sessions, and Jack, so I never met Jack then. We played some darts, Guy and me, they have a dart board. They still have it there at Jack's Tracks. It's now called Allentown. And we played little darts, and then we left. And so I didn't, get involved I really didn't get it that much involved in Townes, but I liked him a lot. And any time we ran into each other, which we did in the bars, you would just run into everybody all the time, and you'd always have a good time, And he liked me, and I liked him. It was as simple as that. And then much later in the 80s, Jack Clement really insisted that I learn how to run the board. He had his house on Belmont, and he put a studio up in the attic, and that was my base. I moved to Nashville in '76 because of Jack Clement. I just took a chance, and I didn't know how it was going to pan out, really. So he persuaded me I needed to learn how to run the board upstairs, and I did. And I became his engineer, basically, for several years. Recorded everybody who walked in the door. And we had a whiteboard down in the hallway, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, what's happening that week, and he'd write on it, and I see Townes Van Zandt. And the way we started our days was to just go into Cowboy's office. And he had a big table as a desk, and he was on one side of the table, and he had a guitar on the wall, a dobro, a ukulele hanging there, and we get the guitar out. He had more than one guitar, and get the guitars out and sit and start to strum, sing a song or two. That's the way you start your day. And whether anything else happened or not wasn't but in this case, I see Townes' name up on the board. I said, "Oh, I see you working with Townes." I said, "Who's doing that?" Because nobody told me anything about it. He said, "Well, why don't you?" That's the way it worked. and I said, "Okay," and so I did, and so I was the engineer at first, and so he oh, there's some rain. Got your windows up? Okay. Is that going to interfere with your sound?
I think it'll add a nice little ambiance.
Okay.
To it.
So I started working, and he had some musicians booked, but so I asked him, I said, "Who's going to play on it?" And he had Kenny Malone and Roy Husky, and it was Mickey White, I think, and Donnie Silverman, who's a horn player. Those Townes, and Mickey and Townes were great pals. And I said, well, maybe Mark O'Connor would be good to throw into that. And I called him up, and he was available, And that's the way it works, It was so easy to do these things. Just you make a phone call, and if they're home, they can come over. It was wonderful, really wonderful.
Was this record at my window?
Yes.
Okay.
And after a day or so, Cowboy had this set up in his office. He had these big clip speakers, and he could listen to what was going on upstairs, but he wasn't there. Physically, he was down in his office, and I was there physically. And you have to make decisions, and I was used to this by this point. I was starting to produce. Engineers are not supposed to make production decisions. Like you make the technical decisions you make, but as far as, do you want to do another take, or is that good, or what? That's just not the role of an engineer. And so after a day or two, I came in the morning. I said, "Cowboy, are we producing this together?" And he said, "I guess so." Okay. Then I can start talking to people and say, "That's good, that's bad, this is good, we're going to go ahead, or we're not going to go ahead, and let's go, get things moving." So that's the way we worked, and it is a beautiful album. And, Townes did have a streak in him of playing kind of mind games with people. And I had observed this quite a bit. And I don't like it, didn't like it, and didn't participate. And he knew that about me. And it never even got close. Never, ever. And that way we had a wonderful relationship. He respected me and I respected him. And I actually loved him and he loved me. I know that. And so it was a beautiful experience. And I think it's one of his very best records.
I think it's his best studio album. It's
Yeah.
my favorite, at least.
Yeah. I mean, Cowboys records were very good, but I think, in my way of thinking, he maybe could have left a few things out.
Well, was Townes very opinionated about how things should come across in the studio?
Not at all. No. He sang, and he was among friends. Charles Cochran also played on that, I think. I might be wrong about that, but I believe so. And Roy Husky and Kenny Malone. These people are your friends, and musical friends, and you don't have to say anything to them. They don't have to say much to you. They listen, and they give you whatever they think is best for your song. And that's it. And so you can get a lot of work done that way. There's not a lot of chit-chat and bullshit going on. I really liked that.
Did you guys make charts? And,
Well, yeah, they would make, but these songs aren't that complicated. And like Roy Husky's charts were a thing of beauty. He had like a little notepad. They were about that big. Roy Husky, if people don't know who he was an extraordinary bass player, and his dad was a bass player. His dad's name was Junior Husky, and he played on a lot of country records, and he played on the Opry for years. But he died very young, in his 40s. And Roy was his son, and he took up the bass, and we used to call him Junior Husky Jr. And Roy's picture is in the Station Inn dressing room, McGuire photograph. He was an absolutely beautiful person. He saw sounds as colors. He told me this.
Synesthesia? Is that what that
Yeah,
is?
and his charts were tiny, little things, and he rarely looked at them. And if he had looked at them, I don't know how he could have read them because they were written so small. But he had impeccable time, beautiful tone. He didn't overplay. He just was there, and it was so something you could really count on, and like a heartbeat. You just knew it was there, and you didn't have to worry about it or think about it. I did an album with Nancy Griffith, the first album we did, and we recorded 13 songs in 2 days. And at the end of it, the last song we were working on, I just happened to look at Roy's hand, and his fingers were black, but he never wavered, ever wavered. Just boom, boom. And he died an untimely death, too, in his 40s from cancer. It's very sad. They have vaults, where you slide a person into a slot in a wall. He was right under his father. Between them, they had 85 years. But he was a gift, and I was one of the recipients, and any record that I made at that time, he was on.
Townes ever talk about Cowboy? Just curious what their relationship
Well, they had a prickly relationship, but drink was not their friend. And both of them could get drunk and just be stupid. I tended to absent myself from, if I could see these clouds on the horizon, which was a bottle of Chivas in Jack's case. He'd send somebody to the liquor store. They'd come back with a bottle of Chivas. Maybe I think I'll just take an early break today and go somewhere else. And he might come back and find out that he fired everybody that day or some stupid thing like that. No, and he and Townes, and then Townes could be cute too. As this album, Jack, I guess they had an arrangement that Jack was going to get the publishing on some of these songs. Well, unfortunately, publishing wasn't available. No, but Townes had neglected to mention that someone else already published those songs. But
Well, the cover of that album,
that's McGuire. That's in the kitchen at Cowboys.
I didn't remember when I interviewed you there 8 or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I walked into that kitchen and it hit me. That's the cover of that album.
That's right.
Were you there when the photo was taken?
I don't know if I was. I doubt it. But I mean, that's where, if at Cowboys nobody came in the front door, you always came into the kitchen, and you always got a cup of coffee in the morning, and then you proceeded to the office, and that was kind of the way you went, and it was, and Cowboy, if he felt like it, would cook a pound of bacon, and you know, it was just a gathering spot, and I'm a firm believer in kitchens as a place for music to happen and people to get together and you know, food, and it's nice. And cousin Bob, Jack's cousin Bob Clement, who owns this place now, has the kitchen. I mean, it's updated a little bit, but it has no real change. You could stand in that same place as Townes and take the same picture almost, you know. And McGuire took that picture, and he's just a great photographer, and I don't think it took 10 minutes, you know.
I took a picture of Sean Camp in the window. We tried to reenact
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Jim McGuire's picture was much better than mine.
Yeah. And I think it might have been a Polaroid. It might have been a color Polaroid, and he kind of messed with it a little bit. It's not clear. It's a little smudgy.
It's an SX70 Polaroid. Before it dries, you can move the emulsion around.
Yeah, I think he did that with that picture.
The fall of 1975, I go to college at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, and I joined the concert committee so I can, you know, get into shows for free. And one of the first shows that I worked was Jerry Jeff Walker and Guy Clark opened up. And I knew about Jerry Jeff Walker, but I didn't yet know about Guy Clark. So I was one of the 10 kids that's standing in a line, and the tour manager can pick one or two to help you do stuff, right? And so I'm standing there, and my hair is a little longer, and I got sort of a semi-Western shirt on, and I have a marijuana belt buckle. The guy goes, "I'll take that guy." I go, "Come on, kid." And he takes me, and it's like, I'm going to help out, right? So he takes me through the backstage and outside and onto the tour bus. I'm on a tour bus for the first time in my life, you know. I'm just barely 18. And he's like, "Have a seat." You know, I'm sitting there at the little table. He reaches up here and pulls down like a 2-pound bag of marijuana. And he's like, "Okay, you know how to do this?" You know? And it's like, yeah. It's like, "Okay, there's 13 guys between the two bands and the crew. Everyone gets 3 joints. So roll them up," you know? So that's my first job in, you know, the music business. And, you know, Jerry Jeff was great. Guy Clark blew me away. So immediately I'm, you know, buying the record, and I become a fan. And the tour that I saw, that Guy Clark only did one full band tour ever in his life with drums and everything, and that was it. And Steve Earle was the bass player. You know, I saw that gig, and then when I went home for, I don't know, Thanksgiving or Christmas, I saw that they were playing in Evanston, and they're playing this Evanston's a dry town, and they're playing this sort of folky joint. And I was like, man, if I get a couple cases of beer and bring them, I'm really going to look good, you know. So I brought the beer and, you know, so I was a big fan, and I learned about Townes over the years. And the photo that you're asking about, there's this photo of Guy and Townes. The woman, Tamara, who made the Guy movie, she saw that photo and asked if she could get a copy, and she wanted to use it in the movie. It is a good, the two of those guys look really cool. And, you know, Guy's got his big ring on that he wore for his whole life. So I had just gotten married, and Sid Straw was asked to go to the Winnipeg Folk Festival, and she asked me to go with and play with her. I can go, Sid, but I mean, this is 2 weeks after my wedding, so you have to bring Mary Lee also. She's like, okay, so we all go, and right away we bonded with Guy and Townes. They had been playing gigs together, and we were on, like, I got to do one of those workshop things with Guy, and he's singing his song, I'm joining in on harmony and stuff. And that photograph that you mentioned, just before that, there's another photograph of him with his arm around me, and he's like in my ear. And I had been extolling how, you know, the folk festivals are really different than rock festivals. What do you mean? Like, on a rock festival, you get 2 cases of beer, you know. Here you get 2 drink tickets. What are you supposed to do with that? And I had said something like, well, you know, I am kind of a drug magnet. And he goes, well, you know, then get on it. You know, it's like, what do you want? What are we supposed to get? And he's like, I want some serious adult drugs. Like, oh, okay. So we hung with Guy and Townes, and at those folk festivals, all the artists are staying at the same hotel, and they usually have like an artist after party. And I saw so many things. That was the first time I saw the Calton case, you know, that fiberglass case. They still go for $1,000, you know, that those guys, and, you know, like rock dudes in the 80s or early 90s, they had like Japanese guitars that they would take on tour. They weren't touring with their real guitar, you know, or a reissue or something, where these guys, they've got vintage Martins and they're carrying them in this case. And those guys knew even more about it. Like, you know, they got the cases in white. Like, why did you get the case in white? It's like, because it has to sit in the sun. You don't want to, you know. I was like, wow, I'm learning all these things. Half the reason guys start playing music is so they don't have to dance. They could just be in the band and not have to dance. So at the after party, Townes Van Zandt he comes up to me. He whispers in my ear for a minute. And Mary Lee, my wife, is like, what do you say? Well, you'll find out. And then he asks her to dance. But he asked my permission first, because he's a Texas gentleman. You know, the picture that I don't have, that I see in my mind, Winnipeg is flat like a pancake. And so we're at this hotel that looks kind of Soviet and huge, you know, and it's just a flat parking lot, and we're waiting for the bus, and there's hangovers all around. And those 2 guys are sitting on their Calton cases with their heads in their hands. You know, the Calton case comes to rescue again. You know, I'm standing there in the sun with my Takamine on my shoulder.
Hey friends, I'm at the Old Quarter Acoustic Cafe, the legendary Old Quarter in Galveston, Texas, and I figured I'd take you guys along and show you the place. Beautiful listening room. What a crazy idea. Someone is playing a song with some finger picking, and you're supposed to shut up and listen. What a crazy idea. Who would have thought it? Okay, we'll go over here to the Townes wall. There's some pictures I've never seen. I've never seen this picture here. There's probably a bunch I haven't. Oh, that's cool. I like how this one's kind of degrading. Is that Townes with Richard Dobson and Rex? Wow. Let me see if I can get a good shot of that. That's great. Man, I've never seen most of these pictures before. Trying to get it without the glare for you guys. You guys ever seen that picture? Good. Have you seen that one of Townes? That's great. This is a photo taken by John Lomax. I did a story on the channel of this, John talking about that day, and perhaps you guys have seen this. John said he took this photo and a few others. Lightning just happened to stop by his dad's house, like John Lomax II's house, and he ran outside and took the pictures while him and Townes together. It might be the only picture of Townes and Lightning together, but John said that it's ran in a ton of different magazines, on TV and all that since then, and he never made a single dollar for it. And while I was sitting there, I said, "Will you print me off a print of it?" And he printed me off one just like this right here, and I handed him $20. So I'm responsible for giving him the only money he ever made off of this photo. And if I only have one claim to fame in life, I guess that's a good one. So I'll take that. Anytime I can hand John Lomax money, I feel like that's a good day. This is great. Gurf and Blaze. Ain't that beautiful? Look at that. Hayes Carl looking like he's going to kick her asses. Hayes got his start here. Blaze Foley played here. There's Michael O'Connor. Look at that. I know Michael from playing with Adam Carroll and Slade Cleaves. Hi, Michael, if you're watching. Richard Dobson, great Richard Dobson. If you haven't read Gulf Coast Boys, you should. I've talked about it a bunch. They talk about hanging around here. Dana Cooper, I know Dana from Nashville, been at a few different parties he's at. Hung out with him a few different times. I'm gonna buy me one of those t-shirts. They sell these online. You guys should buy at least one and support him keeping this place alive. So the person who made this logo designed the album cover for No Deeper Blue, the Townes album. So there's a bunch of Townes stuff on the wall here. There's Rex Bell, which you guys will be seeing the interview Rex soon if you haven't already. Look at that, man. Yeah. Rex had this really cool Dennis Hopper Easy Rider thing going. That is cool. He's still a cool ass guy, as legends are. There's Ray Wiley with Lucas, and is that Kyle next to him? Is drummer Kyle. I met Kyle in Sweden when he was touring with Dave Gonzalez. I walked out of my hotel room and I saw Dave Gonzalez standing out there like, "What are you doing here?" But that's where I met Kyle. And there's Rex on stage with Lightning Hopkins. That's great. That's great. Oh, here's the view from the stage. Look at that. How'd you like to play your song? You folks watching at home. I wish every city had an old quarter. Oh, Butch took these?
Yeah.
Man, I absolutely love Butch Hancock's music. Can you guys see these? These are photos taken by Butch Hancock. I thought about making some bumper stickers. Don't blame me, I voted for Otis Gibbs. But I don't want to encourage anybody voting for me for anything, so that might not be a good idea. Okay, we're gonna go back into the band room. It's the green room, and we got Lightning. Got the Robert Crumb drawing of Lightning Hopkins. I believe that's Robert Crumb. Have some old set lists. I looked through these. Shake Russell. There's some Hayes Carl from just last year, I believe. Hayes is doing 3 nights in a row coming up. I thought about flying down and going to that, but I don't know. I've been on the road a lot here lately. That's Gary P. Nunn. And up here, if you ever wondered what Guy Clark's stage plot looks like, there it is, folks. Right there. This is Ramblin' Jack Elliott's set list. There's the old quarter. That is great. And, there's a bunch of really good posters and such. Another great looking Hayes poster. Seth Walker. My buddy Kevin Anker has played with him. There's some interviews on the channel of Kevin Anker. Go check those out. Great Lightning poster. It's a picture of Guy Clark and Rex Bell. There's my old buddy Sergio Webb right there in the middle before he grew out the beard. There's Dave Olney and Richard Dobson. Townes Flyer. There's Townes Flyer. Poster. Look at that cute kid. What could possibly go wrong? Autograph. Guy Clark. Ray. Look at that young Adam Carroll. Pretty young man. More Richard Dobson. More David Olney. Mary Gaucher. My buddy Tom Utes played here a few different times when he was playing guitar with Mary Gaucher. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm going to read this for you guys. Townes Van Zandt on January 1st at the Old Quarter Acoustic Cafe in Galveston. A few friends and fans of the late Townes Van Zandt gathered for the 3rd annual Townes Van Zandt Wake. Okay, and these are signatures of people who played it. Very cool. Very cool. So Susie Monick, you guys remember Susie who had on telling stories about Townes and Blaze, and she did this artwork. The folks here didn't even know that. I got to tell them about Susie, but you've seen the stuff on the channel. This is her artwork that she did. There's an etching at Townes's grave. Another Townes. thank you guys for putting up with me and watching this, and go online and buy some stuff from the Old Quarter. Old Quarter Acoustic Cafe, probably.com or something. But buy something, tell them Otis sent you, and to help them stay in business. Come to a show here sometime. Make a vacation of it. And I'll see you somewhere down the road. Much love to y'all.
I actually played, I think, on the last track that Townes recorded. This is actually a pretty good story. So it's April of 95. I know when it was because of what else was going on. I'd gotten the Prime gig. I got the gig with John. And so we had our first rehearsal. There's this guy who used to live in town, Dub Cornett, which I don't know if you know about Dub. He's out in California now, involved in, I don't know. He was like Cowboy. He was a protege of Cowboy, or Cowboy, kind of Cowboy Jack Clement, helped Dub out along the way. But, Cowboy was always about, we're in the fun business. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. But so Dub was definitely that. Like Dub, I remember, like nobody knew what Dub did. Like, what does Dub do anyway? But anyways, like one of those guys. A little bit of a tangent there, but Dub Cornett calls me up and says, I got this session. Can you do it? The money's not that good. But it's this friend of mine. You're going to record a Townes Van Zandt song. And Joan Elmoss is going to be there, and I think I knew that much. Or maybe I didn't even know the Joan L part. Just that he said, we're going to do a Townes song. It's this woman I know she wrote a book, and she wanted to have like this soundtrack that went along with the book. And there was the song, If I Needed You, she wanted on there, and she couldn't get permission. So that was the one she wanted, and they couldn't get permission. So Dub was just setting up the session. They're going to record the song. I'm like, okay. I said, but I have my first rehearsal with John Prine that afternoon. He goes, it's not going to take long. It won't take long. And the session was at Javelina, which is RCA, was what they called RCA Studio A at the time. Which Dave Cobb has now. But at this point, it was not really being used. It was kind of in disrepair. But anyway, so I said, okay, all right, I can do it. I go to the session. I'm the first one there. And we get bass sounds. And it's kind of funky, but they have like a lot of the old stuff from the old days of RCA Studio A. I mean, it's still all there. It didn't look like anybody had cleaned it up in a while. And I don't think it was being used on a regular basis. But the engineer was a guy I knew, and Dub was there. And I'm the first one there, and I get sounds on the upright. And then Steve Earle walks in. And at this point, I'd never met Steve. And I'm not sure, but I think this was shortly after he had gotten out of prison. He did a little time. And so Steve walks in, and I'm thinking, oh, wow. I didn't know anything about the session other than I'm playing on a Townes Van Zandt song. And Steve walks in, and then I hear him talking, and I realize, well, Steve's just there to play guitar. And I thought, wow, that's, kind of weird. And I do remember that at one point they said they had like a couple boxes of Townes Van Zandt's catalog, like almost all his CDs. And he said, part of your pay, you guys can take any of these you want. And so I just remember, like, it's in the corner of the control room, and me and Steve are both like on our hands and knees going through and pulling out all the CDs. It was, but that was a funny moment. And anyway, and then after a while, Townes shows up, and I thought, oh my God, like it never crossed my mind that Townes Van Zandt would be there. Just never in a million years. Dub hadn't mentioned it. It's like we're doing a Townes Van Zandt song with Townes Van Zandt. Anyway, it was, yeah, that was one of those moments where I just thought, okay, this is really cool. And we did the song a couple of times. Jonelle Mosser sang the girl's part, and we did it like 2 times, and Townes was like, I'm done. Well, I guess he wasn't doing that well, because he did not live much longer. It was because that's what Dub had said when he said, when I said I had to go to a rehearsal, and he said, this is not going to take long. And I think because he knew that Townes was not going to, like, he was going to sing the song once or twice, and that would be it. You know, he seemed okay, but I'd never met him. I'd seen him at the Exit Inn I'd play a show, which, you know, I don't have that much to compare that to, because I'd never really, it's the only time I'd seen him. I might have seen him get up and do a song, but that's the only like show, like full Townes Van Zandt show I saw. You know, that night had its moments, like where there was, like, it was really great, but there were times when I thought, I don't know, I don't know if he's how together, you know, he is, but I had nothing to compare it to. So, I mean, that day at the studio, same thing. I didn't really have any reference to know whether he was doing well, or, yeah, I was just happy to be there. You know, it was like one of those, I was really happy to be there. You know, there's all these moments I can look at my life, because you know, I was just a music fan that got lucky. You know, like, that's what me and my buddies did in high school. We just listened to records, and listened to a lot of records, and went to as many shows as we could go to. And then I landed on an instrument that I could play. Yeah, it was kind of a perfect day. Yeah. And then I think that was, and I only know this because it's mentioned in the Guy Clark book that Tamara Saviano wrote. I remember running into someone at the airport, and they said, hey, you're in that book about Guy Clark. And I thought, how am I in a book about Guy Clark? I never worked with him, but they talk about that session. I guess Guy showed up later. I don't think I was there when Guy showed up. And then hung out for a little while, and Townes told some stories, and just kind of hung out. And then I had to leave to go to John Prine rehearsal. And I remember walking out and with my upright and putting it in my little pickup truck. And it was a beautiful day in April. And I getting in my truck and starting to drive off over to the Prine rehearsal, and thinking, what is wrong with my life? Nothing. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, at that moment, it was just one of those, you know, one of those days I'll never forget. Got to record with Townes Van Zandt, and then go to my first John Prine rehearsal. It's like, okay, this is why I moved to Nashville.
Hey friends, it's really early in the morning. I came out here early so I could watch the sunrise at Townes Van Zandt's grave. And I figured I'd bring you guys along with me. The first thing that comes to mind when I'm standing here at his grave is an interview I did with my buddy John Lomax. John managed Townes Van Zandt, and he talked about his funeral. And his funeral was at a church on Music Row, I forget the exact name of the church and the address, but he says it on the interview there. You can find that here on the channel. Kind of struck me because Townes Van Zandt's not one of those artists that you think of when you think of Music Row. It's kind of the opposite of that. That's part of the appeal, you know, outside of the amazingly great songs. But I don't know, I think you might enjoy hearing that. And for some reason, I'm thinking about John right now. I'm also thinking about an interview I did with David Ferguson, the great producer and engineer. And he was talking about John Prine. And John Prine would have these poker games at his house. Townes Van Zandt and Guy Clark would come over and play poker at John Prine's house. I don't know about you, but when I moved to Nashville, or if you ever think about moving to Nashville, that's the Nashville I hope to find, you know, where Townes Van Zandt is playing cards at John Prine's house with Guy Clark. And you can also find that interview somewhere here on the channel. But last time I was here was about 10 years ago. It was a little bit different then. It started the sprawl has caught up. All of the sprawl from Fort Worth and Dallas has finally made its way out here. It was definitely middle of nowhere then, but there's a brand new housing addition right there. There's a mega church with a TV preacher just down the road. There's a golf course and some sort of housing addition over here. There was nothing when I was here before. It was just fields around here. I saw construction of a huge, I don't know whether it's a shipping facility or a factory, but it's really, really big going in, and just strip malls and stuff not very far from here. It's all coming this way. But there's a beautiful lake just back behind here. Looks like a reservoir, and I'm guessing that's drawing people from Fort Worth. And I'd like to think that they all came out here to be closer to Townes Van Zandt. I don't think that's the case. Who knows? I'm not sure that they know that such greatness is buried close to them, but maybe a few of them will see this and they will know. But tell me down below, have you ever been here? What was it like when you were here? Tell me what your favorite Townes songs are.
First time I met Townes was I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and I'd moved there in 1970 from here, from Indianapolis, and after a year or so, I got a gig up at the Pioneer Inn in Nederland, Colorado, as the opening act for a Townes Van Zandt, who I didn't know anything about at the time. There wasn't a particularly large crowd of people there or anything, but the Pioneer was just a down-home, good place to play, and there was a guy named Art ran it, and I think he was friends with Townes somehow too. And I remember when Townes showed up, I remember he and I talked a little bit out on the front wooded boardwalk there in front of the bar. And after that, you know, I went ahead and played my little set. When I got finished, he got up there, same stool and same mic. And he did, I think, maybe 1 or 1.5 songs and just went over backwards. I mean, literally just went over backwards. And I'm going, holy smokes, you know.
You fell backwards from his chair?
Yeah. Because I had just talked to him not that long before. It just seemed like he was all right, you know. And I don't know what he did while I was playing, but I don't think he was listening to me. But and so that happened, and I wound up playing some more tunes after that, you know. You know, I don't know how well known he was. I didn't know who he was. So years later, I checked up on Townes, you know, like to see what he was into. And it turns out that he had already had 2 or 3 records out by the time I met him in 1971 or 2, whatever it was. I think it was more like 72. I was just amazed, you know. And I think he's just a little bit older than me, maybe a year older than me, something like that. But that was my first Townes Van Zandt experience. The Downtown Hummingbird, we did a lot of jazz and some blues, Yank and his people, and We did. I had poetry readings with Etheridge Knight, famous poet, and it was kind of like my dream to have sort of a combination club and coffee house atmosphere, and we had that for a while. And then some folks came along and decided that they liked the idea of the Hummingbird, and they bought us out and opened the place on 71st and Keystone. And they took me along as the helper, stage manager or whatever I did, a little bit of booking and all that kind of stuff. And that's when, I think it was December the 3rd, Thursday night in 1981, Townes showed up for a show. By then, I I witnessed the thing in Colorado, and then I'd heard a few stories of him not being totally reliable. Anyways, he got to the Hummingbird. He was with a guy named Mickey White, who I later knew in Austin. Mickey was his sideman. A really good crowd showed up. Townes, it was $3 cover, if you can remember those days. And that was big bucks. Townes got up and played a really nice set. First show was like just wonderful, because I actually was able to fix the PA system so that I could just sit in the crowd, the back of the crowd there, and watch the show without, I wasn't on the board doing stuff. And then after the break, we had a little office space that we used as a green room, sort of. An old buddy of mine named Paul Jeremiah, who was an incredible blues finger picker, very, very well known around, from Newport, Rhode Island. He showed up just as they were taking a break, and we were all in the back room there talking about guitars and this and that. And Townes had a guitar. I don't remember what kind of guitar it was, but the neck had been shaved, and it hadn't been finished. It was unfinished, like somebody had carved on it. And I thought it's kind of odd, somebody going out on tour with a guitar with what about all the splinters, And, it wasn't painted or anything. We hung out for a while talking guitars and stuff like that. And Townes knew Paul, because Paul was a touring dude, And then it was time for the second set. Townes and Mickey got up there, and it seems like after about one or two songs, I think it was sooner than that, but it just seemed like, and I was watching Townes on the break most of the time, not being a shadow or anything, but I didn't see him drinking or doing anything, But that second set, just pretty much right at the start of the set, I think he made partway through a song, he just went blank. I mean, this was different than what he did in Colorado. In that one, he just kind of fell over, but I don't know how to describe it. The audience was pulling for him, they were on his side. And Mickey was, kind of trying to help him along, and had probably been through this more than once. But the audience was, come on, Townes, you can do it. And some of them would even offer up some lyrics that he was forgetting, But it just didn't work. He was out there, and I think I've heard other people kind of say the same thing. And then after I moved to Austin, it was a kind of common thing did he make it? No, he didn't make it, but people still went, and I think that's kind of wonderful in a way that people, I don't understand it all. And I don't know if he went in the restroom and chugged some vodka or what, but he was just gone. I think, we didn't withhold any of his pay or anything. We went ahead and paid him. And
Do you remember how much he made that night?
I don't remember, probably $500 or $600 or something like that, Because that was in the era when we would pay. Richie Havens would get about $2,000. Taj would get $2,000, I think, and for two sets, that ain't bad. A solo guy, people who are not quite as big name, like Townes and people like that would get $400, $500, $600, you know.
Did you ever run into Townes any other times after that?
I ran into him in Austin. This was when I moved to Austin in '85. I ran into an old friend of mine from Boulder, who I'd played music with, named Dave Scheidel, who was just incredible songwriter. He says, "Ah, man, I live just up the street in Floyd Domino's rental house." Floyd was the Grammy Award-winning piano player for Sleep at the Wheel, and went on to play for Merle and George Strait. I don't know, all kinds of people, you know. Journeyman, really, really great piano player. So I was able to move into that house in the attic. And the attic was, you had to go down some outside steps and then go in the back door of the house to use the kitchen. But the attic did have a bathroom and stuff. So I lived there about probably 13 years, I think. It was at 31st and a half Street in Austin. And the Austin outhouse was about 37th or 38th Street. The neat thing about it was I could walk from the back door of my house to the front door of the outhouse without actually walking on a main street. And so if I drank too much, there were walls on both sides, like the back of garages and stuff. So I could like meander my way, and I was always going to make it because it's something I would run into this, and that probably happened a few times. But the Austin outhouse was just my friend Chuck owned it, and one night I went down there, and I think it was maybe Blaze's birthday or something, Blaze Foley, and Townes and the whole entourage, like. I don't know how to describe some of these people, but I mean, they're real people. And I was telling Chuck the other night on the telephone, I said, if Willie Nelson and Waylon, if they're the country outlaws, then these other people, you know, like Townes and Blaze, there was a guy named Jubal Clark. There was just this entourage of just wild people that hung around Townes and Blaze. And so I went there that night, and Townes was there's a bar, and then there's like a little back room. And Townes was back there just chit-chatting with people. And I came up to him and shook his hand and said, "Yeah, you played our Hummingbird back in '81." And because this was probably 1986 or something. And now I know how he is about that, remembering people. He would always tell people he remembered them, because there's no way he probably did, you know. And he's done that to everybody, even, you know. "Yeah, I remember you." But anyways, that's what he said to me, and I didn't really get to talk to him too much else. But there's a thing about whenever I was around that crowd of people that the entourage of Blaze and Townes, I sort of had the urge to want to be a part of that, but something inside me would say, "Don't. You'll kill yourself," you know, because those people lived hard. I mean, they lived hard, and I don't know any other way to explain it. But they were good people, but they saw life. Even some of us see life on a big picture of things, you know, but I think they saw even a deeper picture. And I think it shows up in their songwriting, you know, that they see an inside thing that not everybody sees, you know. I mean, I always thought of Townes that way. I mean, I'm not an expert on his music, but he just has a way. I guess to me, it harkens back to the whole Hank Williams thing, who was self-destructive, and maybe it's because he saw things the way he did that made him self-destructive. I don't know.
Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy John Lomax III. This Townes Van Zandt songbook has become very rare and collectible over the years, and he's going to tell you the story of its origin.
The songbook came out because my brother, Joe, had a publishing company called Wings Press, and it was what you'd call a small press, and he did a lot of poetry. I was managing Townes at the time. This was 76 or 7, and I said, look, Townes is a poet, and why don't we do a book, and it would be Townes' lyrics over here and then the music over here, and they could see, if they wanted to play, there would be the sheet music, and if they just wanted to sing along from memory, there's the lyrics. And so Townes thought it was a pretty cool idea. My idea of it was to show the world that he was more than just a songwriter and singer, that he also had his music, his lyrics could stand alone. That was really the idea that I was trying to present. And so Townes and I sat down, went through songs, and he pretty much picked them all. I think I may have had a couple that I wanted in there that he wasn't that wild about, but we put it in there anyway. So, and then he had a little comment about each song. Sometimes just a sentence or two, sometimes 3 or 4. And then I wrote a little introduction. I got Lola Scobie to write an essay about Townes, and then we had a discography, and we had 2 pages of critical comments from various people about him and original pictures. Also, I wanted to have a songbook that wasn't the same old Mel Bay thing with 2 promo shots and then a bunch of songs. I wanted something that really presented the artist. And so we used photographs from half a dozen different photographers that I just thought were really good and wanted to use. And then my brother had a person kind of do some really cool drawings and little frippery kind of things that really added a lot to it. So we brought it out in paperback and hardback. And I've seen now references saying there were 3,000 hardbacks printed and there were 500 signed by Townes, but I just really don't believe that's true. I think he may have wanted to press up that many and may have thought, I'll do another run, but I don't think there was that many. There was a regular run of paperbacks too. But he did get Townes to sign, I don't know how many, but I have one that he signed, and my wife has one where he did a little drawing of a horse and then drew an arrow and said horse. It was a little line drawing, just very, very kind of funny. But, we brought it out, and the idea really was to advance his career. And also I thought my brother would make a little money on it because it would have a broader audience than obscure poets, regardless of how good they were. Not many people more people knew who Townes was, nowhere near as many as know where he is now. But so that was the idea of it. And, I would have rat-holed a whole lot more if I'd have known what it would be selling for today. And it's hard to find a hardback listed anywhere. There's paperbacks out there, but I haven't seen many hardbacks up, much less a signed hardback. That's probably worth $1,500, something like that.
How did you guys distribute them back then?
He had a distribution thing. My brother, he had a little thing built up because he had this press. He was part of the Small Press Association, and they had bookstores. It mainly went out in bookstores. If Townes had many to sell, I'm not sure if he got a stash to take out on the road or not. But they went pretty fast, and they were gone. And 1988, my brother died, so that was the end of it. Other than I tracked down let's see, he passed away, and in his will, he gave the press to another goofy, well, he wasn't goofy, my brother wasn't, but a goofy woman poet that he knew who had no real interest in doing anything with it. And then it went from her, she died shortly after, and it went from her to a guy named Bryce Milligan in San Antonio who had a little press. And at some point, I tracked Bryce down and bought what was left. He had a few left at the time. He had, I think, sold a bunch to Butch Hancock, who had a bookstore. Yeah, the same guy, but he had a bookstore called Rainlight Books, I think, in Austin back then, and he had a bunch. But, you know, it's hard to find. And that was why I really don't think there were 3,000 hardcovers, even though it says so in one of the books has a page where it said this is number such and such. But at any rate, it was, I don't know if my brother ever made any money or not, but it did sell better than anything he brought out before that. So hopefully he did.
I can say that my buddy Tim Easton opened for Townes in Columbus, Ohio, back when, and he bought one of the books off of Townes that night.
Oh, okay.
Townes signed it, Take the Money and Run, Townes Van Zandt. And so he had at least one on the road to sell.
Yeah, I'm sure my brother would have given him, you know, a fair amount to take out there and work on. But I don't, you know, it was less than a year after that I got booted out of the management by the forces of darkness, I like to call them, who essentially I was asking questions, you know, things like, well, where are the contracts and where are the royalty statements? Where are the publishing arrangements and little minor details? And so the guy running Townes label, Tomato Records, by that point, it had been Poppy, and he engineered my ouster, got Townes drunk, and had him sign some papers. And Townes and I had a handshake deal. That was it. So I was gone. Bam, out the door. It was 1978. And I swore I'd never manage again. And I didn't for 5 years. Till Steve Earle came along.
I was at the Vancouver Folk Festival back in the day when I was playing with Hot Rise. It was probably 1982 or 3. They put people up in college dormitories. They were quads of, like, each group got a suite of like 3 rooms with a little kitchen area, you know, a living room or something. On our floor there was a Russian balalaika group. We got to be friends with this guy who played the bass balalaika, and he didn't speak any English, but he loved coming over to our room and hanging out because we played music. Anyway, so I'm going up the elevator, maybe the second day we're there, and there's this guy he's got a Harmony Sovereign guitar, you know, looked like a 000 size guitar, no case, beat to hell, you know. I said, that's a nice guitar. He says, yeah, you like that? I said, yeah, it's nice. He says, you want to buy it? And that was Townes Van Zandt. So turned out Townes was on our floor with Mickey White. Was that his accompanist? I think Mickey White. The two of them were in one of the suites. So that night, Townes and Mickey came over and they played music, and Townes told a lot of stories. He told a story about being in El Paso. I think this is a famous story. I didn't even really comprehend all of it at the time, but I've heard the story since, where he had all this money that he'd made on a tour or something, and they went across to a boys' town, they call it, across in Juarez, and lost it all. He said, man, I was flush. And at the end of the story, he was broke. But that was Townes, and I was around him that night and at occasionally other events. I didn't get close to him, but that's another one. When we had just moved to Nashville, my ex and my children and I, in 96. And I think it was maybe that year. I don't know what that year he died. It was soon after that. And Guy Clark spoke at his funeral. He said he'd been rehearsing for that gig all his life, you know.
Hey, friends, I'm here in Galveston, Texas, and this is my buddy Rex Bell, the legendary Rex Bell, and he's going to show me something. What do you got there,
I got
Rex?
Townes' finger picks. These picks were. I didn't know what JT, his son, was handing me after we were going to bury Townes, his ashes. He just walked over to me and started to hand me something. I had no idea what it was. It was all of his picks, and just about floored me. And I've never kept anything in my whole life this long, not even wives. So, and I've been playing with them. I use them every day. I use them at all gigs, and they still. I've kept them. Like I say, I've taken good care of them. I'm going to give two of these to JT when I pass one day, and leave these to of course, my wife's a musician who knew Townes really well. I'll leave two of them for her, and I'm going to make sure JT gets a couple of them back.
Can I put those on?
Yeah, you can put them on.
Can you guys see that? Looks like a monster movie with me holding them.
Well, those were the picks that Townes was using when he passed.
Beautiful.
And I stole his finger picking from him. You know, if you listen to me finger pick, it sounds just like Townes. And because I was so influenced by him. Even though we were the same age, he was much older than me in that respect. He was a wise man beyond his years.
Blaze and I used to play this club in Houston called Corky's. A little fern bar held about 100 people or something maybe, and we played there a lot. And I played there with a whole bunch of different people, you know. It was our home base, and, you know, like in a month I might play there 4 times, and I'd go there on the nights that I wasn't playing there. You know, my twin reverb lived at Corky's for a couple of years, stored on stage or in the back room. And so Blaze had met Townes, and he told the owner of the club, I can bring Townes in for a Friday and Saturday if you want, you know. And so they agreed to that, and Blaze organized a band. It was like a 6-piece band or something, and they were there. And Townes was supposed to come in early and rehearse, and then he didn't make that. So Friday night, and, you know, the club owner was worried because of Townes' reputation as, you know, blowing gigs sometimes. You know, if he blew a gig from being drunk, he would always make that up and do a really good job. He'd come back, and it was a point of honor for him. He knew when he had blown it. So he showed up, and he was relatively sober, and he showed up about 10 minutes late for the gig, maybe, you know, 10 minutes past start time. But we just got on stage and started playing, and it was going fine, and people were liking it. And we finished the gig that night. Oh, Townes, when he set up, he had a saxophone that he leaned against the bass drum. And said he had bought it in a pawn shop, and he didn't play it at all. So we finished the gig, and then we stayed there drinking after the gig till, like, you know, 4 or 5 in the morning, which we did every night pretty much. That was the pattern. And then the club owner said, well, we got to go home. And so I went home. Townes went out somewhere. He found people and just continued to drink from the time we left the club. Blaze was with me. He was living in my apartment in Houston. And so Townes found people somehow and drank until the gig the next night, and showed up just gone. But he was doing okay. He was singing the songs, and, you know, he was really, really staggering drunk, but pulling it off. And then suddenly at one point during the night, a switch went off in his brain. And he, in the middle of a line, he switched over to this Cajun gibberish. And I mean, that's what it sounded like to me. I don't know what it was. It was like George Jones in the Donald Duck voice or something, you know. And he started singing in this Cajun gibberish. And I think from that point on, it was all Cajun gibberish, every song. And people were getting angry, and people were leaving. And I mean, like, a lot of people were leaving. And one by one, band members were abandoning the stage. And I was just enjoying the freak show aspect. I can't look away from that kind of stuff. I've been attracted to it all my life. And so it just got weirder and weirder. And then at one point, it ended up with just me on bass and Townes. And he put the guitar down. And he said something to me, let's play You Got to Move, key of E or something. And so I'm just going boom, 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 boom on the low E string. And then Townes starts singing You Got to Move, Mississippi Fred McDowell song, and in a Cajun gibberish. and then he saw the saxophone and he picked it up. And I had heard him mess with it a couple of notes here and there, and it was really instantly obvious to me that Townes could not play the saxophone at all. You know, he just sounded horribly. So anyhow, he started playing this solo. And Townes was a really kind of magical, mystical person. And I swear he started sounding, it was like the best jazz, crazy saxophone solo I'd ever heard in my life. He was like channeling Coltrane or something. It was insane. And he finished this song and he threw the sax down and he walked out the front door and disappeared. I saw him, you know, and by this point, pretty much everybody had gone. You know, there was a couple of tables left maybe. I saw him in an airport like 3-4 weeks later somewhere and said, "Hey, Townes, how's the sax coming?" He said, "I hung it in a tree and I shot it full of holes."
This story has changed for me over the years just because of how I perceived it. You know, that night, the night that I met Townes, I was his support act at a place called Barley's. And this is 1 year before he passed. And he had just gotten off the road from Europe. And me and my buddy Joe Cirillo were opening up. He played the washboard, which were made in Columbus, Ohio. And we'd already toured around Europe and had this little Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee kind of folk thing together. So we're schooled in that folk music. So we're playing our opening set. And there's this guy in the front row. I don't even recognize him. I think he's a homeless guy, like a homeless Native American. That's the first. I'm still picturing Townes Van Zandt from the cover of Delta Mama. I'm picturing this guy in the 70s with a brown suede jacket or something. You know, I knew his songs because I had cool record store guys like make sure that I learned them, you know, and I was a fan and I was really proud to get the gig, but I was not prepared for seeing the man that was going to be dead a year later stand up after we were done, walk up on the stage. He just walked, we were finished. He just stood up, walked on the stage, grabbed his guitar. He's moving pretty slow. He just wants to start playing. His road manager is nowhere around. He's not really with it. You know, you can tell. I'm not sure if he's strung out or drunk, but it's like, I'm like, oh, shit, that's Townes Van Zandt. And he sits down. It's on record somewhere. I think Jerry DeSica actually has the recording. He lives down in Texas, great songwriter. And he goes to start out with Poncho and Lefty. He's just going to get right into the hit, but he can't get many chords into it. It's not happening. So as you know from talking to people about Townes Van Zandt shows, there was the magical ones and then there was the train wrecks. This is unfortunately in the latter category. People are asking for their money back. The promoter, Kurt Schubert, he says to me, "Is this the way you want it to go for you?" You know, he's again with the cautionary tale, the warning. I'm too blown away to even realize what's going on. I'm in the second row kind of watching this happen. Townes starts crying. The audience is crying. A friend of mine in the audience, Jerry Wick, also a great rock and roll singer from a band called Gaunt. He's passed away now. He died. He was hit by a car. He swears at somebody else in the audience, drops an F-bomb. Townes stops what he's doing and says, "Never swear under a roof." And that particular part of the stories I've been able to share with JT and Katie Bell, who I just saw the other day here at Fat Bites. She's a bartender, and I was talking to her about that specific expression, "never swear under a roof." And I've been trying to adhere to that, but I just thought it was a really interesting thing for him to bark out. He told a couple of jokes, tried to be lighthearted. I remember a woman came up and hugged him, tried to just relax him. The show didn't go too well. After the show, he was doing great. We sat in the back in the bar. I brought him some fire water. We sang Hank Williams songs. We harmonized on some Hank Williams songs. I sang a little off key. He was like, whoa. You know, he was like, again, then he was in great spirits. The show was done. He didn't have to do that thing or be Townes Van Zandt anymore or something, you know, about it. So where it used to be a really romantic story for me is now a little bit more tragic, right? Yeah, I bought this book for the sake of the song in at my first South by Southwest. It was Butch Hancock had
Lubbock or Leave It?
had a store called Lubbock or Leave It. That's right, and there was a stack of these, like a huge stack of them, and it was just a couple of bucks, and I bought it. And the night I opened up for Townes, I was suspicious to ask my hero to sign the book, so I asked someone else to have him sign it, and he wrote, "Tim, take the money and run." And you can still get one of these online, but yeah, he wrote, "Take the money and run." You know, it was just kind of one of the other things he did on stage that night was to talk about my songs and what I was doing, which, you know, for me sitting there, I was wondering what he was getting into, but I think he did understand that I loved folk music, you know, and that, you know, I don't have the story where he's barking out directions for me to sing Wabash Cannonball, you know, but that was the kind of vibe I was getting from that night. He's like, oh yeah, you listen to the heroes of your heroes and learn something. So I wrote a letter, asked to be his tour manager. I was like, I'm going to take care of this guy, you know, like thinking I could do anything about it, whatever. Jerry DeSica called me the day he died. I was living in New York City, New Year's Day, I believe, and told me the news. And man, I wasn't surprised at all, you know. But it's, you know, we have those songs now, and I do try to find a light in that story that's positive. And but it's very, you know, when I talk to JT or something, I'd rather talk about fishing now, you know, because it's intense, you know. And he says in that thing, he's fishing in the documentary. He says, yeah, a lot of people are thinking about Townes Van Zandt, this romantic character. They weren't thinking about the dad that was gone all the time. So again, a huge effect on me with a 10-year-old daughter now, you know, is like, do I need to be on the road all this time missing certain things? And the answer is no. I mean, I still travel and play, but it's a different feeling now. Like, I don't want to be that kind of father. And I'm not saying that he was a bad dad, but I just don't want to be that kind of guy where my kids dissing me in a documentary. And you know, I mean, I just love him. I love his family, and I just kind of wish them, you know, peace of mind today. When it comes to the life, the traveling life and the drinking life and the life of excess, there's a lot of romantic memories because it wasn't all bad, you know? And I don't think of that night with Townes Van Zandt, getting drunk with Townes, as necessarily a bad memory, except in light of now what eventually happened to me, where I progressed to getting more and more trouble, mental trouble. For me, jail time, things that happened that were real physical results of my drinking. So now I think of it more now as a little bit more, a little less romantic and a little more tragic, because, you know, Townes was gone a year later, right? And I have friends that have died, you know, young from drugs and alcohol, and I'll do anything, you know, today to talk to anybody about what I did, you know, to alter that path. That's part of my purpose now too, really. It's just like, you don't have to go through that. Yeah, a lot of the greats seem to have this something going on, some obsession that drove them to be this way. And it's just, you know, it's a little painful when it comes to family, you know, when the children that are left over, that, you know, the adult children that grow up with that story. It's not easy, man, because I'm really lucky. I had a mom and dad that were there for me, and not everybody can say that. So when it gets to that stuff, like I like to, you know, give me a call. It's easy to get a hold of me. I mean, you can get a hold of me really easily. You can find me on the internet. Let's talk about it.
Hey, friends, I just heard a great story about Townes Van Zandt and Lucinda Williams. I learned this story from Michael Corcoran, a great writer, and I'll put a link down below where you can find out more about him. But Larry Monroe, the legendary DJ from KUT in Austin, was given a T-shirt by Lucinda Williams, and he decided to go to the Hole in the Wall bar there in Austin. He showed up about closing time wearing that T-shirt, and when he walked in, there's Townes Van Zandt, and he saw Lucinda Williams over sitting at the bar. Townes walks up to him, and he pulls out a quarter. Townes does, throws it up in the air, and puts the quarter down. He says, "Call it, Larry." And Larry's like, "Oh, Townes, I'm not a gambler. I don't want to do that." He said, "Call it." Looked him dead in the eye, and he says, "Hey, tails." Townes looks at it. Larry lost, and he says, "Larry, give me that T-shirt." He says, "Townes, I didn't know we were gambling on the T-shirt. I don't know what we're doing here." And he just looked him dead in the eye, and he says, "Larry, give me that T-shirt." And Larry's like, "Hell with it." So he took off the T-shirt, and he could see Lucinda sitting over at the bar, kind of wondering what the hell's going on, probably disappointed. And he takes off the T-shirt in the middle of the bar, hands it to Townes. Then Larry grabs that same coin, throws it up in the air, and says, "All right, Townes, now you call it." Townes called it wrong, and Larry says, "All right, give me my shirt back." And Townes says, "No, you won my shirt. I'll give you my shirt, but I get to keep your shirt." So Townes takes off his shirt, hands it to Larry. Townes puts on the Lucinda Williams T-shirt, and Larry puts on Townes' shirt and leaves the bar, and kept that shirt for the rest of his life. And he said that he wore that shirt to Townes' funeral, and he told this story, and he was pretty much the only comic relief at Townes' funeral.
That was in Uncle Seymour's house on West 13th Street. But that was where that's where the hippies hung out. I mean, Clarksville now is probably one of the richest neighborhoods in Austin. But back then it was all black. It was a freedman's town. And it was started by a slave who bought 2 acres, former slave. He was freed. He bought 2 acres on 10th Street and started selling plots to other freed slaves. And then Elijah Peace was I don't know what he was, but he was a rich guy up there, and he had a lot of slaves and had a lot of land, and he gave land to his slaves. And so for about a 6-block area, it was all black, and it was rural. In 1928, Austin had a city plan where they wanted all the blacks to be in one area, so that they would only have to have 1 swimming pool, not 2, not 1 for the blacks, 1 for the whites, etc. They wanted all the blacks in one area, and so if you didn't go there, you didn't get services. And so the blacks in Clarksville says, "Well, we don't care. We use an outhouse. We don't want you looking at. Just leave us alone. We don't need you. Just leave us alone." And so they hunted and fished, and they had their own thing. And the roads were all dirt. They had to they oiled the roads so that the dust wouldn't come up. And so you had the grime everywhere. And that's how it was until 75. The first time they ever paved it was 75. So anyway, a lot of the hippie kids, all the white people back there were afraid of black neighborhoods. It's a bad neighborhood. But the hippies didn't care. But $50 a month rent, we'll take our chances. That's what it was, $50-$60 a month. And so they started moving in there, and Townes got his trailer. Townes and his girlfriend Cindy, they got free use of a trailer from this guy who was he used to fly marijuana, and he died in a plane crash. And so they could stay there as long as they wanted to because he was gone. I think he might have given them a month or 2. They ended up staying about maybe 9 months. Townes never really lived in Austin except that time. It might have been a couple other times he was couch surfing, but he was really more Houston, Nashville, Fort Worth. But Austin kind of claims him based on that. But Seymour was this guy, really like a preacher, and he had his own kind of philosophy, and all the black kids thought he was really cool. He used to drink from when he woke up to when he went to bed all day long. He'd get drunk and, philosophize, and it was a cool thing, I guess. It was cool for him too, because he was an old man. He was 80. He was 79 when they made Heartworn Highways. He died later that year. That's why he was crying when Townes sang "Waiting Around to Die." He had bladder cancer. He was on his way out, so he ended up dying at age 80. And that was a cool period, I think, of Austin that the filmmaker was really fortunate to get, the guy who made Heartworn Highways. But at the time, though, they were all junkies. They were all on heroin. And a woman that I talked to, she's still alive, and she was part of that crew, and she says, yeah, they had like decoys. They would do decoys so that the film crew wouldn't be around them when they were going to shoot up. They'd say, hey, come over here, look at this chicken. And then they'd go over there and chase a chicken while they're over there shooting up. But it was just, it was a crazy time. I think was it 75? And then, then Clarksville got gentrified. There's still pockets where there's still black people from the old days that still live there. Very few. Well, the only thing is Sweet Home Baptist Church, where Seymour sang in the choir. It was right behind his house. That's still there. It's a black church, in this white neighborhood. Yeah, he's buried in Evergreen Cemetery. I did a little column on it on my Substack, and I have the address and the location of the grave on there. But he was pretty well known in Austin in the 50s and 60s as the walking blacksmith. He would go from Buda to Blanco, and he would basically hitchhike to go shoe horses. He didn't have a car, and so he was well known that way. And there's a writer in town named Billy Lee Bramer who wrote The Gay Place, which is the book about Austin that people say you got to read this book. I think it's when LBJ was a senator. It's around those eras. It's Schultz's Garden, that sort of thing. But while he was at the Austin American Statesman, he wrote a big feature about Uncle Seymour. And I got a lot of my article from that. It was a really nice piece. Townes, I never actually met him in person. I talked to him on the phone once. I had to review a show of his in Dallas at Port David's Pub. And it was one of the good ones. He had JT with him, I think, to sort of make sure he was on his best behavior, his son. And so I knew a lot of the songs. I'm reviewing the show. I knew a lot of the songs, but I got the road manager, Harold Eggers. I said, he was leaving. I said, hey, give me your number. I'm going to call you tomorrow morning and just get the set list, just to make sure I got all the right titles and everything like that. So I call him the next morning, and Townes picks up. And he goes over the songs. Just tell me the songs you wrote like that. And I said, I was really surprised you did that Bruce Springsteen song. You did a car song, and it was Racing in the Streets. And he goes, that's not a car song. You need to go back and listen to it again. And then I listened to it again, and that's Townes' story. That song is about just destroying everything in your path to get what you want artistically. Just like forget your loved ones, forget your this and that. You're on a mission. And so that was really the only time I talked to him, but I did see him once. I saw a perfect Townes set in New York City at Tramps. It was during a new music seminar, and it was also the day I got my first credit card or used it. I got an American Express card, and it's like I'm just keep them coming, more beer. It was like $95, and I'm like broke. I didn't realize that beers cost like $8 in New York at the time, but it was totally worth it. It's just like, but that showed me when I would go to Port David's, I would bring $20 with me, and they charged. They had $4.50 for Heineken, I think. So I took $20 with me, so that's like 3 beers with tips. And one day I ended up writing 3 $20 checks because I ran out of 20. He was just a guy that you just wanted to drink when he played. And I'm kind of revisiting. My son's a big Townes Van Zandt fan, and Blaze Foley. those are his two favorite guys, you know. So I'm kind of revisiting them because Blaze, I didn't really give Blaze any attention when he was in town. He was a scary guy that you walked across to avoid, you know. But then you listen to his music, and Townes really loved him too. So he must have been pretty good if Townes liked him. Though other people like Guy Clark hated him. Other of Townes' friends didn't like Blaze because they thought Blaze was a bad influence. But it's really the other way around. I mean, Blaze didn't. He started drinking whiskey when he met Townes.
I first met Townes on Love Circle in Nashville, Tennessee. He came over to where I was living with Jimmy Gray, his bass player, and he came to the side door, and I had a cat, and the cat jumped on him and then jumped on a table, and Townes threw the whole table out the door. And that was how I first met him. And I was like, man. I moved to Nashville in 1976. So it was maybe around 78. You know, I got to see him rehearse, and I learned how to drink during the day because of him. and I also remember seeing him at Mississippi Whiskers. That was a club here in town that Don Schlitz played at. And I was sitting in with a girlfriend of mine named Pam Belford. And he was sitting at the end of a bar. It was real narrow. And he was sitting there, and he asked me, he said, what is Smokey the Bear's middle name? And I was like, I don't know. And he said, the. And that, I remember that was my first Townes joke. But, you know, I knew him, and he was with Cindy at the time, and it was pretty crazy times, and people, you know, the 70s were pretty wild, and the 80s got even wilder. He had a trio at the time. It was Jimmy Gray, Rooster Rowland, and a fiddle player named Cody. And actually, Cody pawned his Music Man amplifier, and Townes like put it in the pawn shop, and I got the pawn ticket from Townes and got the amp out and used it. So there was a connection, and I got to hear him play. But I also was a fly on the wall. I had my own bands, and we had an all-girl band. I played with different people, so I kind of, I got to play with him a little bit, but it wasn't like I would ever wanted to be in his band. It was a rough, gambling, drinking band. Harold Eggers was kind of their road manager, and so I had these suede leather pants, and Townes asked if he could borrow them for a gig. And he's really tall, and I'm really short, so they were really high water on him. But he wore the pants at some gigs, and then he fell in the mud. So when they came back from the tour and gave me the pants, they're all covered with mud. But and he also taught me how to play Indian poker, where you put the cards on your forehead and guess. So, I got to see a lot of kind of after the gig drinking and gambling. And there was music, and there was a guy named Irving Kane who played a trombone, and Townes was kind of messing around with a fiddle. So we would have some weird, like different kind of jams. Like, Townes practiced with the guys, but if we jammed, he liked to have a different instrument he didn't know how to play, so he could just kind of get silly and mess around. He was fun to be around in the early days, but then later in life, he was just kind of really sad. And I also heard that he didn't really, I don't know how to say this, but he didn't really kind of welcome women so much in his music. He was like a man's man. And so a long time ago, he was doing an outdoor festival, and I did get to sit in on Old Shep. That was like the first time, to play a little mandolin or banjo, I forgot. But, the fact that I had dated guys who were in his band, I got to be one of the guys, which kind of got me a little more in that scene. Yeah, a lot of women liked him, and I've heard stories that in Texas, women, they wanted to be there with him when he died. I mean, he kind of had a big cult following, and you know. But like I said, I was more of a, I drank and did drugs back in the day. So I would play cards with him. I'd gamble. I would, you know, I would do the non-musical things that kind of came after the gig. He once bet a cut of the cards on his gold tooth. And I remember with Mike Ewald, this friend of ours who's now passed away, but he was like a wild kind of Indian guy who would steal the tip jar. It was but Townes lost the cut of the cards, and they went out in the woods and I think pulled the wrong tooth, is the way I hear the story. So he was good on his bets, and he had a fringe suede jacket that I think he had gambled that for cut of the cards. So he would be good on his bets, but he lost, stuff. I don't really know what he won, but he was good on his losing. And I did play with Sergio. I played later in the 90s. I played with Richard Dobson, and Sergio was in the band. And we had played in Europe, and we did some shows, with Townes. And I heard that Townes would have to have doctors waiting when he got off the plane because he drank so many of the little liquor bottles. And we were on a plane ride with George Strait's band, and he wouldn't let them drink. So the stewardess gave us all the little liquor bottles. Sergio might remember this, and they said, well, while you're in Europe, it's expensive, and you can have all these little bottles. And we put them all on the bed and took a picture. That was before digital cameras, but it was like we were like, man, we just got all these little airplane bottles of vodka. Yay! Yeah. He would play at the old Springwater, and he played at Douglas Corner. I was there for one of his last shows, as I hear it, or maybe next to last show I know of. But when he played at Springwater, he would, and that was back in the days, the roof would be leaking. Like you had to have a gig when it wasn't raining out. But people like Old Crow Medicine Show and Guy Clark, and there was a circuit at the Springwater back, that's one of the oldest bars. But I remember, even back then, Townes would, he'd kind of forget the words to his old song. He'd go like, Pancho was a bandit. And then you could hear his wife going, Lefty. And Lefty, you know what I mean? So he was tortured. He was a tortured soul of what I saw. He was fun loving, but saying a lot of us, I think had depression from too much drinking and drugs is just my own take on it, Yes, I have a recording of Townes, and I moved and took all my VHSs, and I donated a bunch to MTSU, but then there was like a handful of my favorites that I kept. And one is, and I digitalized it or DVD'd it. And one is Townes playing a benefit for a guy named Titus Alley. And it was recorded at Douglas Corner. And I hear it was one of his last gigs. And he started reciting a poem he wrote about Titus Alley. And we had a little backup band. I remember Michael Catalano was in it. I was on the banjo. I can't remember the other people, but it would be in the credits of this video. But Townes started reciting a poem and just broke down sobbing. And while we were playing the music, he was just kind of crying. It's a very emotional, video of him. And it was kind of not done of him specifically. It was all these different musicians tributing this songwriter friend who died, and he just happened to be one of the people on the bill. But it was a pretty emotional moment. And I know that actually the Smokey the Bear, what's his middle name story, I was down the street from Douglas Corner was a little antique shop. And I bought a little Smokey the Bear figurine, or Townes bought it. I'm not kind of sure, but he told me that joke with that bear again. You know, he had a lot of time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. He had a lot of like these little jokes that he would tell.
What he tell us on stage in between songs?
Yeah, and he would tell them, you know, to his friend. He was just kind of always, he was always on. He was, you know, always kind of, he was always entertaining, but in a kind of a sad, Pierrot kind of way. You know, he would come over to where I live because when I lived with Richard Dobson, I had a place in Belmead that I rented or owned and then owned, but Townes would leave his canoe there. And I remember him saying, this canoe, it's not like I'm giving it to you. The canoe belongs to nobody. We all just get to use it, you know. So he would go canoeing with Richard a lot. And, you know, so he'd come over. And
where would they canoe?
On the Harpeth. You know, Townes played on the road with, you know, these guys. He traveled, and that's why he had a handler. You know, that's why Harold Eggers was he needed someone to kind of take care of everybody. And so that's where he was. And then later, Janine, you know, I got to know her through him, and he lived at her place. So on Town, I think it was Town Park Drive, or it had the word Towns in it. So, you know, so I knew him more going places. And the last memories of him, and these were pretty heavy. That was when Pinto Bennett lived in West Nashville in the Nations. And so I remember him at Pinto Bennett's house. And he had a little medicine bag he would carry with him. But he also did a lot of crying then in his last days. We would just be sitting around the table, and he would just start crying. And so those were hard times, you know.
Do you remember the last time you saw Townes?
The last time was at Pinto Bennett's kitchen table, like saying, where he was just crying, you know. And I was dating a guy at the time who lived like homeless under the bridge. I didn't know that at the time, but it was like he wanted to meet Townes, and it was kind of like introducing the alcoholic to the alcoholic. So it was kind of, like I said, it was weird times. There was just like a lot of sadness, and that was, so I just remember that being the last, and then the gig at Douglas Corner being sort of my next to the last seeing him. But I've known him through such a long period of time. You know, that's why, you know, he was a younger guy. I guess if you go from the 70s to whenever he died, was that 90? 90? So that's a long, you know, if you do the math, that's a long period of time to know someone, you know, and like saying as a friend, but not, you know, again, when he was with women, I had my own boyfriend. So I wasn't like in that, you know, I just got to see him as a band member kind of, or as a, you know, the girlfriend of the guy in the band.
Did you go to his funeral?
Yes, I did. Yeah, it was like a lot of people who knew him. And I remember seeing Cindy there. You know, she was, I mean, it was kind of, but I just kind of, it was just the passing of an era, and I just kind of stayed quiet. I didn't want to speak, and I wasn't like famous person to speak, but I saw a lot of people I knew there. And
where was it?
It was, it was a church on Music Row somewhere. I can't remember the name of it, but I remember, you know, everybody being there, and I remember it being kind of like a who's who, you know, and a lot of the people that were there, I kind of knew through the art world, because I did a lot of clay figurines of musicians. Actually, Guy Clark had bought a piece that was on his living room table. And so, you know, he was there. I got to know him sort of through Townes, and Springwater was a bit, you know, like Townes had friends who are famous and not famous, I guess. He just had a bunch of different people. Okay, I think he was a heartfelt writer. You know, I think he did write from his heart, and he he did like to have a good time, but like I said, I think there was an underlying sadness. A lot of people who are comedians, I worked with Robin Williams, and I had no idea that he was depressed. And so I think Townes, he brought all this joy to people, but he had a sadness. And I also heard stories that on trips where he'd travel, there would be young people try and keep up with him, like young guys wanted to hang with him and drink with him, and he would leave them in his wake. He would these people couldn't keep up with him, and so, and like I said, I had a good constitution back then myself, and I think we might have even done hard drugs together back then, but again, I had to quit everything so I could continue to live and tell these stories.
There were 3 or 4 variants on that picture, and it's the only picture I've ever seen of Townes with Lightning Hopkins, who was one of his 3 major influences, the other being Hank Williams and Bob Dylan. So that was in 70, probably 70, 71 maybe, and he at the time lived with his first wife a block from my house, which was just out of weirdness. I had met him in Austin in the mid-'60s, and it was strange to come home and there he was around the corner, but he came over, and Lightning was there to see my dad because they were working together. My dad actually managed him for 10 years and booked him and would go and find him and take him on tours and whatnot, or at least get him set up to go to the local shows. But he put him on a lot of folklore society shows, Houston Folklore Society, that he founded with some other men in 1951, which is still going. Now, it's now the Houston Folklore and Music Society instead of just the Houston Folk Society, but it's the same general thing. So he and Lightning and his wife came by, and I'm not sure. There's other people in some of the other shots, one of which is my ex-wife, who was my wife then, and another was Daryl Harris, who was a friend of Townes. And I don't really know why all these people converged at that time, but I did realize I better take some pictures. So I shot like 4 pictures or something, and that was it. Lightning went off to do whatever with my dad, and Townes went off, and that was that. And
Just a chance encounter.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, but at least I had the sense to grab a camera and save it, because this was 50 years ago. And that, like I say, it's the only picture I've ever seen of the 2 of them together. And there's no picture of Townes and Dylan that I'm aware of, and certainly not with Hank. My dad was sort of the de facto booking agent. He was the only contact that anyone had to get something to Lightning, but Lightning didn't have a phone. So my dad would have to get in the car and ride over to his house, and if he was lucky, Lightning would be at home, but he wasn't exactly what you'd call a homebody. So this would mean my dad would have to go and start asking around at various places where Lightning might be hanging out, drinking and gambling. And sometimes that would, he'd find him right away. Other times it would take a few hours to track him down, and it would be, oh yeah, he was just here and he went down to Smiley's down the way, and so he'd troop over there. Oh, you just missed him. He went to Fred's in the garage. They're gambling over there. So he would find him and then lay it out for him, what he'd been asked, about the gig and whatnot, and get an answer and go back and call the people. But it's kind of like, I don't know why he didn't just say, look, get a phone, I'll pay for it. But that was the story, and he went on several tours with him, and my dad's job really was, A, get Lightning to the gig, B, open the show. Just he would sing folk songs a cappella, just get up and sing them. He said Well, that was the way it was when when his father, he'd say, well, my dad recorded them and they weren't sitting around with guitars on horseback. They were singing cowboy songs. So he, he would get up and sing and then bring on Lightning, introduce Lightning, and then get out of the way. Lightning come up, do the show, and then my dad would collect the money. And most importantly, then make sure that most of it got back to Lightning's wife, because left to his own devices, Lightning would start drinking and gambling and might not get home with anything. It took him on his first plane ride and out to California. They did the Ash Grove, and I think they did something at University of California, Berkeley, and came on home. But it was quite an adventure. Well, he had to have seen him at some point or another, I would think, because Lightning was playing in Houston a lot in these various blues clubs, and he did the Folklore Society shows. And I don't think my dad ever presented Townes at the folklore shows, because I don't think Townes had really gotten to that point yet where he was good enough to get up there with people like Lightning and hold his own. I know Guy Clark eventually got on no, he didn't get on any of the folk shows either. He was just starting too. This was, we're thinking in late 50s, early 60s, and neither had quite gotten their chops up enough to be on these shows, but they could very well have come. And I know Guy had seen my dad perform, because he talks about seeing him do one of the Lead Belly song where he was chopping wood and all, and like my dad would sing the song, and then each verse, whack, and he'd haul a big log out on stage, and he'd have an axe, not one of these silly hatchets, full on axe, and whack, take this hammer, whack, and pieces of wood would fly all over the place. Take it to the camp and whack. So I know Guy was just blown away. He told me a couple of times. I mean, pieces of wood this big would be flying off at people in the front row. But that was authentic. It was a work song, by golly. And so I don't know, but Townes had a lot of opportunities, and he must have seen him because he was such a huge influence.
When did that photo start circulating?
It didn't start circulating until maybe 5-10 years ago, when I think my son posted it on Facebook, and then it's everywhere now. I mean, you see it half the time. I don't get credit. Of course, I never made a nickel off of it. But, I'm just happy that I did it and documented that moment. And like I say, there were at least 2 and maybe 3 different shots, and I can't find my negatives, and I don't even know where the other shots are, but I don't think people know who took it, and if they do, they don't know how to find me or whatever. But no one has called me up and said we want to use that picture, which is kind of surprising, but fine. I'd like to get some money someday for it. But at least pay for the film and developing.
You can feel the warmth in that photo between the one photo that we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. You can feel the warmth between the people involved. Even though Townes is on one side of the photo and Lightning is on the other, they feel connected to me.
Yeah, and my mom was there too, which, she was such a great, gracious sort of enfolding person who would make everyone feel good. And I don't know then if Townes had ever even met Lightning or anything. I just realized when they were both there, let me get my camera.